Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Stuart Muller had built his life on precision and control. At 42, he commanded respect not through volume, but through presence. His steel-gray eyes missed nothing, and his methodical approach to everything, from his successful construction consulting firm to his family relationships, had earned him a reputation as someone you didn't cross. Those who knew him well understood that beneath his calm exterior lay a man who never forgot a slight and never forgave betrayal. The Muller household sat on 3 pristine acres in the hills outside Denver, a testament to Stuart's eye for detail and his wife Sophia's taste for elegance. 13 years of marriage had produced their daughter Emma, a bright 7-year-old who inherited her father's observational skills and her mother's striking features. Sophia McMahon had been 25 when she married Stuart, a stunning brunette with ambitions that seemed to align perfectly with his own. She'd worked in marketing for a luxury hotel chain, bringing home stories of high-profile clients and glamorous events. Stuart had been smitten not just by her beauty, but by her apparent drive and sophistication. Now 38, Sophia had transitioned into volunteer work for various charities, organizing galas and fundraisers that kept her busy during Emma's school hours. Stuart's birthday had fallen on a crisp October Saturday. The morning had started typically, Emma bouncing on their bed at dawn, Sophia making his favorite coffee, and the familiar rhythm of weekend family life. But there had been something different in Sophia's demeanor lately. Small things, phone calls that ended abruptly when he entered the room, new clothes that appeared without explanation, and a certain distance in her eyes, even when she smiled. The gift box arrived via courier at precisely noon, wrapped in expensive black paper with a silver ribbon. Sophia had been in the shower when the doorbell rang, so Stuart had signed for it himself, noting the sender's address was from downtown Denver, an area where Sophia's charity work often took her. "Dad, don't open it," Emma had said immediately upon seeing the package. Her voice carried an urgency that made Stuart pause. "Why not, sweetheart?" he asked, crouching down to her level. "Can't you see it?" Emma's eyes were wide, fixed on the package with an intensity that seemed beyond her years. Stuart looked closer at the box, studying every detail. The wrapping was flawless, professional. But as his architect's eye examined the package more carefully, he noticed something odd about the shipping label. The sender's name was partially obscured, but what he could make out made his blood run cold. C. Wiley. Craig Wiley. Stuart knew that name, though he'd never met the man personally. Craig was a real estate developer who'd been circling some of Stuart's bigger projects lately, trying to poach clients with promises of faster timelines and cheaper costs. More importantly, Craig had been showing up at several of the charity events Sophia organized, always managing to get photographed with the organizers for the society pages. Stuart's mind began processing information with the cold efficiency that had made him successful in business. The expensive wrapping, the personal delivery on his birthday, the way Sophia had been acting lately, and now his daughter's inexplicable reaction to the package. Instead of opening the gift, Stuart made a decision that would change everything. He carried the box to his home office and placed it unopened on his desk. Then he made a phone call to Marcus Webb, a private investigator he'd used for business purposes in the past. "Marcus, it's Stuart Muller. I need you to do something for me, and I need it done quietly and thoroughly." 30 minutes later, as Marcus was explaining the surveillance options available, the doorbell rang. Through his office window, Stuart watched 2 police officers approach his front door. His blood chilled, but not from fear, from rage. Whatever was in that box, whatever game was being played, he was about to find out exactly how deep this betrayal went. Sophia answered the door, and Stuart could hear her voice rising in what sounded like genuine surprise and concern. The officers were asking about a package delivery, something about investigating a harassment complaint. Stuart remained in his office, listening and learning, his mind already 3 moves ahead of whatever trap had been set for him. As he watched the police car pull away 20 minutes later, Stuart's expression remained calm, but inside, a cold fury was building. Whoever had sent that package had made a crucial mistake. They'd underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. Stuart Muller didn't just play defense. He played to win, and he played for keeps. Chapter 2. The Investigation. The police visit had been brief, but illuminating. According to the officers, they'd received an anonymous tip about a threatening package being delivered to the Muller residence. When they'd asked to examine the box, Stuart had cooperated fully, allowing them to scan it with their equipment. Finding nothing dangerous, they'd left with apologies and a case number. But Stuart had noted everything. The timing, the specific details the anonymous caller had somehow known about the package, and most tellingly, the look of relief that had flashed across Sophia's face when the police pronounced the box harmless. That evening, while Sophia took Emma to her grandmother's for their weekly dinner, Stuart finally opened the package. Inside was an expensive watch, a Rolex Submariner worth at least $15,000. The accompanying card was simple. Happy birthday, Stuart. Time for new beginnings. A friend. Stuart photographed everything, then carefully repacked the box exactly as he'd found it. He had no intention of keeping the watch, but he had every intention of finding out why someone had sent it, and why his wife seemed to know more about it than she was letting on. Marcus Webb arrived Monday morning with preliminary findings that confirmed Stuart's worst suspicions. For the past 3 months, Sophia had been meeting Craig Wiley at least twice a week. Not at charity events, but at the Fairmont Hotel downtown, always during school hours, always the same room. The surveillance photos were damning. Intimate dinners, hand-holding, and most devastating of all, Sophia wearing a different expensive watch in the photos from last week. One that matched the style of the Rolex currently sitting in Stuart's safe. There's more, Marcus said, spreading additional photos across Stuart's desk. Craig Wiley's going through a nasty divorce. His wife filed 6 months ago, citing adultery, but she needs proof to get around the prenup. Word is she's offering a substantial reward for evidence. Stuart studied the images, his expression unreadable. In one photo, Sophia was laughing at something Craig had said, her hand resting on his chest in a gesture of casual intimacy that felt like a knife to Stuart's gut. But it wasn't the pain that consumed him. It was the calculation. What do you know about Craig's business? Stuart asked. Real estate development, mostly commercial properties. He's leveraged pretty heavily right now, banking on a big mixed-use project on the south side. If that deal falls through, Marcus shrugged. He's looking at serious financial trouble. Stuart was quiet for a long moment, his mind working through possibilities. I need you to dig deeper. I want to know everything about Craig Wiley, his business partners, his debts, his enemies, his weaknesses. I want to know who else is in his circle, who he trusts, and who might be willing to sell him out for the right price. What about your wife? Marcus asked carefully. What about her? Stuart's voice was ice cold. She made her choice. Now she gets to live with the consequences. That evening, Stuart played the perfect husband and father. He helped Emma with her homework, complimented Sophia on dinner, and made casual conversation about their upcoming weekend plans. But he was watching, cataloging every lie, every evasion, every moment when Sophia's attention drifted to her phone. When Sophia excused herself to take a call from the caterer for the children's hospital gala, Stuart followed quietly, listening from a hallway as she spoke in hushed, intimate tones that confirmed what he already knew. I can't talk long. Yes, he opened it. No, the police said it was fine. I think we're safe for now. I miss you too. As Stuart returned to the living room, Emma looked up from her coloring book. Dad, are you okay? Stuart knelt beside his daughter, studying her perceptive eyes. Why did you tell me not to open that package, sweetheart? Emma considered this seriously. It felt wrong, like when someone's being mean but pretending to be nice. Stuart felt a surge of pride in his daughter's instincts, mixed with rage that she was being exposed to this deception. You're very smart, Emma. Always trust your feelings about people, okay? That night, as Sophia slept beside him, Stuart stared at the ceiling and planned. He'd built his career on understanding structures, on knowing exactly where to apply pressure to bring things down safely and completely. Marriages, he was learning, weren't so different from buildings. You had to understand the foundation, identify the load-bearing elements, and then remove them in exactly the right sequence. Craig, Wiley, and Sophia thought they were playing a simple game of deception. They had no idea they'd just walked into the crosshairs of a man who never left anything to chance and who never, ever forgave a betrayal. Chapter 3. The Foundation Cracks. Stuart spent the next week building his intelligence network with the same methodical precision he applied to his construction projects. Marcus Webb's investigation had expanded beyond surveillance into a comprehensive dossier on Craig Wiley's life, business, and associates. The picture that emerged was of a man skating on thin ice. Craig's development company was 3 months behind on loan payments for his signature project, a mixed-use complex that would either make him wealthy or bankrupt him. His divorce proceedings were bleeding money into legal fees, and his soon-to-be ex-wife, Marion Wiley, was proving to be far more resourceful than he'd anticipated. Stuart arranged to meet Marion through carefully orchestrated social channels. A mutual acquaintance from the country club mentioned that Marion was looking for an architect to redesign her new home, and Stuart graciously offered his consultation services. Marion Wiley was everything her estranged husband wasn't: subtle, intelligent, and driven by a quiet fury that Stuart recognized and respected. Over coffee at her attorney's office, she laid out her situation with clinical precision. "Craig thinks I'm just another trophy wife who'll roll over for his lawyers," Marion said, her voice steady but her eyes blazing. "He has no idea that I've been documenting his affairs for years. I just need the right leverage to finish this." Stuart leaned back in his chair, studying the woman across from him. "What kind of leverage are you looking for?" "The kind that proves he's been hiding assets and lying under oath. The kind that voids his prenup and gives me everything I'm entitled to after 15 years of marriage." Marion paused, then added quietly, "I know about your wife, Mr. Muller." "I'm sorry." Stuart's expression didn't change. "What do you know?" "That she's been helping Craig hide money in charity accounts. That she's been using her position with various organizations to launder his assets through fake donations and grants. And that she has no idea I've been watching them both." The revelation hit Stuart like a physical blow, but he absorbed it without flinching. Sophia wasn't just having an affair. She was actively participating in financial fraud. The watch, the expensive gifts, the new clothes, all of it funded by money stolen from legitimate charities. "Can you prove it?" Stuart asked. Marion smiled for the first time since they'd met. "Not yet, but I think together we might be able to change that." Stuart extended his hand across the table. "Mrs. Wiley, I think this is the beginning of a very productive partnership." Meanwhile, Stuart's home life continued its facade of normalcy. He attended Emma's school events, maintained his business relationships, and played the role of devoted husband with Oscar-worthy performance. But he was also laying groundwork for what was to come. He arranged for Bernard Werner, his most trusted foreman, to begin subtle documentation of any charity construction projects that Sophia had steered toward Craig's company. The pattern that emerged was damning. Over the past year, Sophia had influenced at least 6 nonprofit organizations to use Craig's services, often for inflated contracts that exceeded fair market value by substantial margins. Stuart also began building relationships with key figures in Sophia's charity circle. At a hospital fundraising gala, he charmed Therese Crane, the chief financial officer who'd grown increasingly concerned about cost overruns on recent projects. Over dinner, he planted seeds of doubt about the bidding processes, always careful to frame his concerns as professional curiosity rather than accusation. "Sophia does such wonderful work organizing these events," he told Therese over wine. "Though I have to admit, as someone in construction, some of the project costs seem high. Not that I'm questioning anyone's judgment. I'm sure there are factors I don't understand." Therese's frown suggested she'd had similar thoughts. "Actually, I've been meaning to ask someone with your expertise to review some of our contracts. Would you mind taking a look? Purely as a favor, of course." "I'd be happy to help," Stuart replied, knowing he'd just gained access to the documentation he needed. The pieces were falling into place, but Stuart wasn't satisfied with simply exposing the fraud. That would be too clean, too simple. Craig and Sophia had betrayed him personally, and they'd used his daughter as an unwitting tool in their deception. For that, they would pay a price that went far beyond legal consequences. As he watched Sophia getting ready for another charity meeting the following Thursday, Stuart made a decision. It was time to accelerate the timeline. In 48 hours, he would begin the most important project of his life: the complete and utter destruction of everyone who had betrayed his trust. But first, he had one more conversation with Emma. "Sweetheart," he said, finding her in her room that evening, "do you remember telling me not to open that package?" Emma nodded solemnly. "How did you know it was bad?" Emma thought carefully before answering. Mom was scared when it came, but she was pretending not to be. And scared people do stupid things. Stuart hugged his daughter close, marveling at her wisdom. "Yes, they do. But smart people like us, we make plans. And we always protect the people we love." Chapter 4. The First Strike. Friday morning brought the first phase of Stuart's revenge into motion. While Sophia attended what she believed was a routine meeting with the Children's Hospital Development Committee, Stuart was 3 blocks away in Marion Wiley's attorney's office, turning over a meticulously prepared dossier of evidence. The documentation was devastating. Bank records showing unusual cash flows through charity accounts, contracts signed by Sophia that directed work to Craig's company at inflated rates, and email communications between Craig and Sophia discussing how to manage the money flow without raising red flags. Stuart had spent 2 weeks building this case, calling in favors from financial contacts, and using his construction industry connections to verify that Craig's billing was fraudulent. "This is enough to destroy them both," Marion's attorney, Luke Hogan, said as he reviewed the materials. "Financial fraud, charity misappropriation, violation of fiduciary duties. We're looking at criminal charges, not just civil penalties." But Stuart wasn't finished. That's just the foundation. Now we build the structure that brings everything down. Phase 2 began that afternoon when Stuart visited the construction site of Craig's flagship development project. The Meridian Complex was supposed to be Craig's crowning achievement: luxury condos, high-end retail, and office space that would establish him as a major player in Denver's development scene. Instead, it was about to become his funeral pyre. Stuart had done his homework. The project was financed through a complex web of investors, loans, and municipal bonds that required specific completion milestones to avoid default. Craig was already 3 months behind schedule and had used the charity money to cover cost overruns. More critically, the project relied on city permits that could be revoked if irregularities were discovered in the financing. Alejandro Wood, Stuart's contact in the city planning department, met him for coffee that afternoon. They'd worked together on municipal projects for years, and Alejandro trusted Stuart's professional judgment completely. "Alex, I need you to take a very close look at the Meridian Complex permits," Stuart said quietly. "I've been hearing rumors about financial irregularities in the development funding." Alejandro frowned. "What kind of irregularities?" Stuart handed him a carefully edited version of his dossier, focusing on the financial aspects while omitting any mention of Sophia's direct involvement. The kind that could make the city liable if this project goes sideways. "I'm not saying anything definitive, but as a friend, I'd recommend a thorough audit of the funding sources." "I'll have our people look into it Monday morning," Alejandro promised. "Thanks for the heads up, Stuart. This could save the city a lot of embarrassment." That evening, Stuart implemented Phase 3. He called a family meeting with Emma, arranging for them to have dinner alone while Sophia attended another charity function. "Dad, where's Mom going all the time?" Emma asked over pizza. Stuart chose his words carefully. "Your mother has been making some poor choices lately, sweetheart. Sometimes adults make decisions that hurt the people they're supposed to love and protect." Emma's eyes were serious. "Like lying?" "Yes, like lying. And when people lie to us, especially people who are supposed to love us, we have to decide how to respond." "Are you and Mom going to get divorced?" The question hung in the air between them. Stuart had been dreading this conversation, but Emma deserved honesty, or at least as much honesty as a 7-year-old could handle. "I don't know yet, Ma, but I want you to understand something very important. Whatever happens between your mother and me, you will always be safe. You will always be loved. And you will always be my priority." Emma nodded solemnly. "I know, Dad." I trust you. Later that night, Stewart received the call he'd been expecting. Sophia's voice was strained when she explained that the charity meeting had run late, and she'd be staying overnight at her sister's house to avoid the long drive home in bad weather. Stewart knew she was with Craig, probably celebrating what they thought was their continued success in hiding their affair and their theft. They had no idea that while they were playing house, their entire world was being systematically dismantled. Stewart spent the evening in his office, reviewing timelines and adjusting his strategy. Monday would bring the city audit that would freeze Craig's project. Tuesday would see the charity board meetings where Therese Crane would present routine financial reviews that would expose the fund misappropriation. Wednesday, Marion's divorce attorney would file amended papers with criminal fraud allegations. And Thursday would be when Stewart played his final card. He pulled out his phone and dialed Marcus Webb's number. Marcus, it's time for Phase 4. I need you to arrange something for me, and it needs to look completely natural. What do you have in mind? Stewart's smile was cold as winter steel. I'm going to give Craig Wiley exactly what he thinks he wants, and it's going to destroy him. Chapter 5, The Tightening Noose. Monday morning arrived with the precision of a Swiss watch. Stewart was in his office reviewing construction reports when his phone rang. It was Alejandro Wood, and his voice carried the strain of a man who'd just discovered a municipal nightmare. Stewart, that tip you gave me about the Meridian Complex. Jesus Christ, what did you uncover? I take it the audit found something. Stewart kept his voice neutral, professional. Found something? Stewart, this is a disaster. The funding structure is completely fraudulent. Half the charity money they claimed as donations never went through proper channels, and the other half came from organizations that are now saying they never authorized the expenditures. Stewart felt a surge of satisfaction. What's the city's next move? Emergency permit suspension, effective immediately. We're shutting down the entire project until this gets sorted out. And between you and me, I don't think it's getting sorted out. The FBI is going to be involved before the week is over. By noon, local news vans were already gathering at the Meridian Complex construction site. Stewart drove by during lunch and felt a grim satisfaction watching the workers stream out of the site carrying their tools, their livelihoods suddenly uncertain because of Craig Wiley's greed. Phase 4 was already in motion. Marcus Webb had spent the weekend implementing Stewart's most psychological gambit yet. Craig Wiley was about to receive an offer he couldn't refuse, one that would reveal exactly how desperate he'd become and how far he was willing to go to save himself. The setup was elegant in its simplicity. Marcus had approached Craig through intermediaries, posing as a representative of foreign investors interested in buying the Meridian Complex project at a fire sale price. The investors were real. Stewart had arranged them through his international business contacts, but the terms were designed to force Craig into increasingly compromising positions. Tuesday brought the charity board meetings. Stewart arranged to be out of town on business, providing himself with an alibi while Therese Crane presented her routine financial review to the Children's Hospital Board. The findings were presented as discoveries made during standard due diligence, with no hint of Stewart's involvement. Sophia called him that afternoon, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. Stewart, something terrible is happening. There are questions about some of the charity projects I've been working on. They're saying there might be financial irregularities. What kind of irregularities? Stewart asked, playing the concerned husband to perfection. I don't know exactly. Something about contracts and funding sources. They've asked me to come in tomorrow for a formal interview with the board and some outside auditors. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding, sweetheart. You've always been so careful with the charity work. Yes, Sophia said quickly. Yes, I have been. I'm sure it's just someone made a mistake somewhere. That evening, Stewart received a call from Gordon French, a federal prosecutor he'd met at various civic functions over the years. They'd maintained a casual friendship built on mutual respect for each other's professional competence. Stewart, I need to give you a heads up about something that might affect your family. What's that, Gordon? Your wife's name has come up in connection with a financial fraud investigation we're pursuing. Nothing specific yet, but I thought you should know that she might be contacted for questioning in the next few days. Stewart managed to sound appropriately shocked and concerned. Financial fraud? Gordon, there must be some mistake. Sophia does volunteer work for charities. She doesn't handle money in any professional capacity. That's exactly why this is complicated. The fraud appears to have been perpetrated through charity organizations, using people in positions of trust to redirect funds. I'm not saying your wife is a target. She might just be a witness, but these investigations can get messy quickly. I appreciate the warning. Is there anything I should know about protecting her legally? My advice? Get her a good attorney before she talks to anyone. And Stuart, be prepared for this to get ugly. Financial fraud cases have a way of revealing things that families would rather keep private. Wednesday evening brought the most challenging performance of Stuart's life. He sat across from Sophia at dinner, watching her push food around her plate while Emma chattered about her school day and maintained the facade of a loving, concerned husband. The charity investigation is getting more serious, Sophia said quietly after Emma had gone to bed. They're asking about specific contracts, specific donations. Stuart, I'm scared. For a moment, looking at his wife's pale, frightened face, Stuart almost felt something resembling pity. Almost. Then he remembered the intimate photos Marcus had shown him, the lies she'd told, the way she'd used their daughter as a cover for her deception. What exactly are they asking about? He said gently. Projects that Craig's company worked on. They're saying the contracts were overpriced, that the charity money was misused. Sophia's voice dropped to a whisper. They think I was involved in steering work to him. Were you? The question hung between them like a blade. Sophia looked directly at him for the first time in weeks, her eyes searching his face for any sign that he knew the truth. I might have made some recommendations. Craig's company does good work, and I thought. You thought what, Sophia? I thought I was helping. The charities needed contractors they could trust, and Craig was always professional. Stuart nodded slowly, as if accepting her explanation. I'm sure that's all it was. But maybe you should call an attorney, just to be safe. Gordon French recommended someone who specializes in this kind of thing. Relief flooded Sophia's face. You're not angry? Why would I be angry? You were trying to help. Stuart reached across the table and took her hand, feeling nothing but cold determination. We'll get through this together. As Sophia squeezed his hand gratefully, Stuart was already planning Thursday's final revelation. By sunset tomorrow, Craig Wiley would be in federal custody. Sophia would understand exactly how thoroughly she'd been outmaneuvered, and Stuart's revenge would be complete. But he still had one more surprise prepared, one that would ensure neither Craig nor Sophia would ever forget the price of betraying Stuart Muller. Chapter 6. The Trap Springs. Thursday morning dawned gray and cold, matching Stuart's mood as he prepared for the final phase of his revenge. Emma had left for school with her usual kiss and "love you, Dad," while Sophia remained in bed, claiming illness. Stuart knew she was simply paralyzed by fear, waiting for the other shoe to drop in the federal investigation that was closing in around her. At precisely 10 a.m., Marcus Webb called with the news Stuart had been waiting for. Craig took the bait. He's meeting with the foreign investors this afternoon at 2 p.m. He's desperate enough that he's bringing financial documents he shouldn't have access to, documents that prove he's been hiding assets from his divorce proceedings and using charity money to keep his business afloat. And the recording equipment? Already in place. Every word he says will be captured and admissible in court. Plus, my contact in the U.S. Attorney's Office will be monitoring the meeting remotely. If Craig incriminates himself the way we expect, he'll be arrested before he leaves the building. Stuart felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. What about the financial transfers? All traceable back to accounts Sophia helped establish. The federal audit will show a clear pattern of conspiracy between her and Craig to defraud multiple charitable organizations. Even if she claims ignorance, the evidence shows she was integral to the operation. At noon, Stuart received a call from Marion Wiley. Her voice carried a mixture of vindication and genuine sadness. Stuart, I wanted to thank you before this all becomes public. The evidence you helped gather, it's going to end Craig permanently. Not just the divorce, but criminally. He'll serve real prison time. He earned it, Stuart replied simply. I know this isn't easy for you either. Whatever happens with your wife, I hope you know you did the right thing. Stewart ended the call and sat quietly in his office, thinking about justice and revenge, about the difference between what was legal and what was right. In 3 hours, the man who had been sleeping with his wife would be led away in handcuffs. Before the week was over, Sophia would face federal charges that could send her to prison for years. But Stewart wasn't finished. At 1:45 p.m., he drove to the office building where Craig's meeting was taking place. He didn't go inside. That would come later. Instead, he positioned himself across the street where he could watch the federal agents who were undoubtedly preparing to make their arrest. At 3:17 p.m., Craig Wiley emerged from the building in handcuffs, flanked by FBI agents and followed by news cameras that had been tipped off about the arrest. Stewart watched with cold satisfaction as the man who had destroyed his marriage was loaded into a federal vehicle. Then he drove home to deliver the news to his wife. Sophia was in the living room when he arrived, still in her robe, her face pale and drawn. She looked up when he entered, hope flickering in her eyes. "Stewart, have you heard anything about?" "Craig was arrested an hour ago," Stewart said quietly, settling into the chair across from her. "Federal charges. Conspiracy, fraud, money laundering. He's looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison." The color drained completely from Sophia's face. What about the charity investigation? What about it, Sophia?" Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. For the first time, she seemed to see past the mask he'd been wearing for weeks. "Stewart," her voice was barely a whisper. Stewart reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. He placed it on the coffee table between them and leaned back in his chair. "Open it." With trembling hands, Sophia opened the envelope and began pulling out photographs. The surveillance photos Marcus had taken over the past months. Sophia and Craig holding hands at restaurants, entering the hotel together, embracing in parking lots. But these weren't the most damaging items in the envelope. Those were the financial documents that showed every fraudulent transaction, every misappropriated charity dollar, every lie she'd told to cover their crimes. And at the bottom of the pile, a detailed timeline showing exactly when Stewart had discovered each piece of evidence. "You knew," Sophia whispered, staring at the papers scattered across the table. "You've known for weeks." "I've known for weeks," Stewart confirmed. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Sophia's eyes darted toward her phone, toward the door, toward anywhere but Stewart's implacable gaze. "I can explain." "No." Stewart's voice cut through her protest like a blade. "You can't explain. You can't justify. You can't negotiate. You made your choices, Sophia. You chose to betray your family. You chose to steal from charities. You chose to help a man commit felonies. Those choices have consequences. What do you want?" The question came out as a sob. Stewart stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the life he'd built, the home he'd provided, the security he'd created for his family, all of it poisoned by the woman behind him. "I want you to understand something very clearly," he said without turning around. "In approximately 2 hours, federal agents will arrive here with a warrant for your arrest. You will be charged as Craig's co-conspirator in a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. You will be convicted. The evidence is overwhelming. And you will serve significant prison time." Sophia was crying now, harsh sobs that shook her entire body. "Please, Stewart. Please. I'll do anything. I'll end it with Craig. I'll pay back the money. You'll do nothing." Stewart turned to face her, his expression as cold as Arctic steel. "Because you have nothing left to bargain with. Your boyfriend is already in federal custody. Your bank accounts are frozen. Your charitable positions are terminated. And your marriage is over. What about Emma?" Sophia managed through her tears. For the first time since he'd entered the room, Stewart's expression softened slightly. "Emma will be protected. She'll be raised by someone who understands the difference between right and wrong, someone who would never use her as a cover for criminal activity. You can't take her away from me. I'm not taking her anywhere. You're the one who chose to leave." Stewart moved toward the door, then paused. "Pack whatever you can carry. You have 90 minutes before the FBI arrives. I'd suggest you use that time to call a federal defense attorney." As Stewart reached the doorway, Sophia called after him desperately. "Stewart, please. I love you. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I love you." Stewart paused at the threshold and looked back at the woman who had been his wife for 13 years. When he spoke, his voice carried finality that felt like a judge pronouncing sentence. No, Sophia, you love yourself. You love money. You love excitement. But you've never loved me. If you had, you never could have done what you've done. He straightened his tie and checked his watch. 87 minutes. I'd start packing. As Stewart walked away from his collapsing marriage, he felt no satisfaction, no triumph, no sense of justice served. He felt only the cold certainty that some betrayals can never be forgiven, and some trust, once broken, can never be repaired. But there was still Emma to think about. And Emma deserved a father who would protect her from the consequences of her mother's choices, no matter what that required. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. The federal agents arrived precisely on schedule, their black sedans rolling up the Mueller driveway at 5:47 p.m. Stewart watched from his office window as 6 agents in windbreakers marked FBI surrounded the house with professional efficiency. He'd sent Emma to stay with his sister for the evening, explaining only that Mommy was going away for a while and there might be some confusion at the house. Agent Sarah Harrison led the team, a compact woman in her 40s whose reputation for thoroughness had made her the lead investigator on high-profile financial crimes. Stewart had researched her background extensively. She'd built her career on cases exactly like this one, and her conviction rate was over 90%. Stewart opened the front door before they could ring the bell. Agent Harrison, I'm Stuart Mueller. I've been expecting you. Mr. Mueller, we have a warrant for the arrest of Sophia McMahon Mueller. Is she on the premises? She's upstairs packing. She's been waiting for you. Agent Harrison studied Stewart's face carefully. In her experience, spouses of fraud suspects usually fell into predictable categories: shock denial, angry enablement, or protective defiance. Stuart Mueller fit none of these patterns. His calm cooperation suggested either remarkable emotional control or something more complex. Mr. Mueller, you understand that your wife is being arrested on federal charges related to conspiracy and financial fraud? I understand completely. I'm the one who provided most of the evidence for your investigation. The admission hung in the air like smoke from gunshot. Agent Harrison had reviewed the case file extensively, but the source of the initial evidence had been carefully obscured through intermediaries and anonymous tips. Perhaps we should speak privately after we've processed Mrs. Mueller, she suggested. Sophia appeared at the top of the stairs carrying a single suitcase, her face composed but her hands shaking. She'd changed into a conservative blue dress and had attempted to cover the signs of her earlier breakdown with makeup. The effort was admirable, but ultimately futile. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman about to lose everything. Sophia McMahon Mueller, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and violation of federal banking laws. Agent Harrison's voice was professional but not unkind as she read the Miranda rights. Stewart watched as his wife was handcuffed and led toward the waiting cars. At the last moment, Sophia turned back toward him, her eyes pleading for some sign of the man who had once loved her. Stewart, she called out desperately, please don't let them destroy me completely. For Emma's sake, please. You destroyed yourself, Stewart replied quietly. I just made sure there were consequences. After the federal caravan departed, Stewart found himself alone in the house he'd shared with Sophia for 13 years. The silence was profound, broken only by the grandfather clock in the hallway marking the passage of time that would never be recovered. Agent Harrison returned 2 hours later, this time without her team. She accepted Stewart's offer of coffee and settled into the living room, where just hours earlier, Stewart had systematically destroyed his wife's world. Mr. Mueller, I need to understand your role in this investigation. The evidence you provided was comprehensive, almost too comprehensive. Stewart met her gaze steadily. I discovered my wife was having an affair. When I investigated further, I found evidence of financial crimes. I reported what I found to the appropriate authorities. Through multiple intermediaries, using carefully planned revelations designed to maximize criminal exposure while minimizing your own legal involvement. I'm a methodical person, Agent Harrison. When I commit to something, I'm thorough. Agent Harrison leaned back at her chair, studying the man across from her. Mr. Mueller, in my experience, very few people possess the skills and connections necessary to orchestrate the kind of investigation you conducted. Most betrayed spouses hire a divorce attorney and a private investigator. They don't build federal criminal cases. Most betrayed spouses don't discover that their wife has been stealing from children's charities. Is that what this was about? The charity fraud? Stewart was quiet for a long moment, considering how much truth to share. Agent Harrison, when I took my wedding vows, I meant them. When I became a father, I committed to protecting my child from harm. When I built my business, I chose to operate with integrity, even when it cost me money. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening sky. Sophia violated every principle I've tried to live by. She betrayed me personally. She betrayed her responsibilities as a mother, and she betrayed innocent people who trusted her with their charitable contributions. So you decided to destroy her. I decided to ensure that her actions had appropriate consequences. There's a difference. Agent Harrison finished her coffee and stood to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back at Stewart. Mr. Mueller, what you've done, it's going to follow you for the rest of your life. Are you prepared for that? Stewart's expression was unreadable. Agent Harrison, what my wife did was going to follow me for the rest of my life anyway. At least this way, justice was served. After the agent left, Stewart sat in his home office and began planning the next phase of his life. There would be custody hearings, divorce proceedings, media attention, and the complex process of rebuilding his life as a single father. Emma would need counseling, explanations appropriate for her age, and the stability that came from knowing her father would never abandon her. But first, there was one more conversation to be had. Stewart picked up his phone and dialed Craig Wiley's attorney, Ron Herring. Mr. Herring, this is Stewart Mueller. I understand your client is looking to make a deal with federal prosecutors. Mr. Mueller, I'm not sure it's appropriate for us to be speaking directly. I think it's very appropriate. I have information that might help your client reduce his sentence. Information about the true scope of the conspiracy he was involved in. There was a pause on the line. What kind of information? Stewart's smile was cold as winter. The kind that will ensure Craig Wiley understands exactly who he tried to cross, and what that mistake is going to cost him for the rest of his life. As Stewart outlined his proposal to Craig's attorney, he felt the satisfaction of a master craftsman putting finishing touches on his masterpiece. Craig Wiley would learn that his affair with Sophia had been just the beginning of his problems. Stewart had spent weeks building a trap that would follow Craig for decades, affecting his parole prospects, his future employment opportunities, and his ability to ever rebuild his life. Some betrayals, Stewart reflected, deserved to echo through eternity. And Stewart Mueller never forgot, never forgave, and never left a job unfinished. Chapter 8. The Final Verdict. 6 months after Sophia's arrest, Stewart sat in the federal courthouse watching his former wife receive her sentence. She stood before Judge Francis Kirk wearing an orange jumpsuit, her hands cuffed behind her back, looking like a shadow of the elegant woman who had once organized charity galas and commanded social respect. The prosecution had been merciless and efficient. Assistant U.S. Attorney Monica Marsh had laid out a case that painted Sophia not as a naive accomplice, but as an integral architect of a sophisticated fraud scheme that had stolen over $3 million from various charitable organizations. The evidence Stewart had provided formed the backbone of the prosecution's case. An additional investigation had revealed the true scope of Sophia and Craig's crimes. Mrs. Mueller, Judge Kirk said, his voice carrying the weight of decades on the federal bench, you held positions of trust in multiple charitable organizations. You used that trust to systematically divert funds intended for children's hospitals, homeless shelters, and educational programs. Your actions didn't just constitute fraud. They represented a profound betrayal of society's most vulnerable populations. Stewart watched Sophia's shoulders shake as the judge continued his remarks. In the months since her arrest, she had aged years. Her hair had gone prematurely gray. Her face bore lines that hadn't been there before, and her once confident bearing had been replaced by the defeated posture of someone who finally understood the magnitude of their mistakes. Craig Wiley had been sentenced the previous month to 18 years in federal prison. His cooperation with prosecutors had reduced what could have been a life sentence, but Stewart's additional evidence, financial records showing Craig had been skimming money from construction projects for years, had ensured the sentence remained severe. Craig would be 62 when he was released, his development company bankrupt, his reputation destroyed, his ex-wife remarried, and living comfortably on the settlement she'd secured. "I sentence you to 7 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation," Judge Kirk announced. "You will also pay full restitution to the defrauded organizations, a total of $3.2 million, which will be secured by liens against any assets you may acquire in the future." Sophia collapsed into her chair as the sentence was pronounced. 7 years. Emma would be 14 when her mother was released. Assuming Sophia served her full sentence without incident, her daughter would go through adolescence, high school graduation, and the early years of college without her mother's presence. As the court officers prepared to lead Sophia away, she turned toward the gallery where Stewart sat. Their eyes met for the first time since her arrest, and Stewart saw something he'd never expected. Not pleading, not anger, but a kind of grim acknowledgement. She knew what she had done. She knew what he had done in response, and she understood that this was justice, even if it was justice delivered by the man she had betrayed. Stewart didn't nod, didn't speak, didn't offer any gesture of forgiveness or reconciliation. He simply watched as his former wife was led away to begin serving her sentence, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction that the consequences had finally caught up with her choices. Outside the courthouse, Marion Wiley was waiting for him. She had attended every major hearing in both cases, her presence a reminder of how many lives Craig and Sophia's crimes had affected. "It's finished," she said simply. "Yes," Stewart agreed. "It's finished." They stood together in companionable silence, two people who had survived betrayal and ensured their betrayers faced appropriate consequences. Marion had rebuilt her life with impressive efficiency, using her divorce settlement to start a non-profit organization that helped other women navigate complex divorce proceedings. She'd also begun dating a retired federal judge, a relationship built on mutual respect rather than passion, but one that seemed to bring her genuine contentment. "Have you thought about what comes next?" Marion asked. Stewart considered the question carefully. "Emma comes next. Making sure she grows up understanding that actions have consequences, that trust is earned and not given, and that sometimes the people we love most are capable of hurting us most deeply. That's a heavy lesson for a child. It's a necessary lesson. I won't let her grow up naive about human nature." Stewart drove home to find Emma in the backyard, building something elaborate with the construction set he'd bought her. At 8 years old, she developed an impressive understanding of structural engineering and an almost obsessive attention to detail, traits she'd inherited from her father. "Dad, look at this," she called out excitedly, gesturing to her creation. "It's a bridge that can hold up even if one part gets damaged." Stewart examined his daughter's work with professional interest. The design was sophisticated for her age, incorporating redundant support systems that would distribute weight if any single element failed. "That's excellent engineering, sweetheart. Why did you design it that way?" Emma considered the question seriously. "Because you never know when something might break. But if you plan for it, you can still keep going." Stewart felt a surge of pride mixed with something deeper, a recognition that his daughter had already learned one of life's most important lessons. She understood that betrayal and disappointment were possibilities to be planned for, not disasters that should destroy everything you'd built. "You're absolutely right," he told her. "Good engineers always plan for failure." That evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Stewart sat in his office reviewing the legal documents that would finalize his divorce from Sophia. The proceedings had been simplified by her criminal conviction. There were no custody disputes to resolve, no property divisions to negotiate, no alimony payments to calculate. Sophia had forfeited any claim to Emma or to the assets she'd helped build through her criminal behavior. Stewart signed the papers with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else in his life. 13 years of marriage dissolved with the stroke of a pen, reduced to legal language that captured none of the complexity of love, betrayal, and justice that had brought them to this point. But as he sealed the envelope containing the signed documents, Stuart allowed himself a moment of genuine emotion. Not grief for his failed marriage, that had died the moment he'd seen the surveillance photos. Not regret for his actions. Sophia and Craig had earned every consequence they'd received. Instead, he felt something rarer and more valuable. The satisfaction of a job completed with absolute precision. Stuart Muller had built his life on the principle that structures must be sound, that shortcuts led to collapse, and that every element must be tested to ensure it could bear the weight placed upon it. His marriage had failed those tests catastrophically, but his response had demonstrated that some foundations were indeed built to last. As he turned off the lights in his office, Stuart thought about the future he would build with Emma, a future based on honesty, integrity, and the unshakable understanding that some lines should never be crossed, and that crossing them carried consequences that echoed through generations. He taught his daughter to build bridges that could survive even when parts failed. Now he would teach her to build a life that could withstand any betrayal, any disappointment, any test that the world might devise. Because Stuart Muller never forgot, never forgave, and never failed to finish what he started. Chapter 9. The Foundation Holds. 2 years after Sophia's sentencing, Stuart stood in his kitchen making breakfast for Emma, now 10 years old, and showing every sign of inheriting her father's analytical mind and uncompromising moral code. The morning routine had become sacred to both of them, a time when they discussed everything from Emma's school projects to larger questions about life, justice, and the importance of making good choices. "Dad," Emma said over her cereal, "Mrs. Peterson asked us to write about someone we admire for our essay assignment. Can I write about you?" Stuart paused in his coffee preparation, touched by his daughter's words, but careful not to show too much emotion. "That's very flattering, sweetheart. But what would you write about?" Emma considered this with characteristic seriousness. "I'd write about how you always do the right thing, even when it's hard, and how you protected me when someone was trying to hurt our family." In the 2 years since Sophia's conviction, Stuart had been careful about how he discussed her mother's crimes with Emma. Age-appropriate explanations, counseling sessions with a child psychologist, and gradual revelation of facts as Emma became old enough to understand them. The result was a child who understood that her mother had made terrible choices, but who also felt secure in her father's unwavering protection and love. "What if I told you about someone else you could admire?" Stuart suggested. "Someone who overcame even bigger challenges?" But Emma shook her head. "I know other people do brave things too, Dad. But you're the one who made sure bad people face consequences for hurting good people. That's what heroes do." Stuart felt a complex mix of emotions at his daughter's words. Pride, certainly, but also the weight of responsibility that came with being someone's hero. Emma's moral framework was being shaped by watching how he'd handled the greatest crisis of their family's life, and he was acutely aware that every decision he made was teaching her lessons about justice, forgiveness, and the price of betrayal. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed Marion Wiley's number, a call that likely meant news about Craig or Sophia. "Marion," Stuart answered. "What can I do for you?" "Stuart, I wanted to let you know before you heard it elsewhere. Craig died in prison last night." The news hit Stuart like a physical blow, though not in the way he might have expected. He felt no satisfaction, no sense of justice completed. Instead, he felt the strange emptiness that comes when a long chapter finally closes. What happened? Heart attack, apparently. He'd been having health problems for months. The stress of prison life, the financial ruin, the complete destruction of everything he'd built. His body just gave out. Stuart was quiet for a moment, processing the information. "How do you feel about it?" "Honestly, relieved. I know that probably sounds callous, but I've spent 3 years looking over my shoulder, wondering if he'd find some way to retaliate when he got out. Now Emma won't have to worry about that either." "Emma." Stuart looked at his daughter, who was pretending to focus on her cereal while obviously listening to every word of the conversation. "Marion, I need to go. Can we talk later?" "Of course. Give my love to Emma." After ending the call, Stuart sat down across from his daughter. He'd learned that honesty, delivered with appropriate context, was always better than the uncertainty that came with secrets and half-truths. Emma, that was Mrs. Wiley. She called to tell us that Craig Wiley died in prison last night. Emma set down her spoon and looked directly at her father. How do you feel about that? The question was exactly what Stuart should have expected from a child he'd raised to think critically about complex moral issues. Emma wasn't asking for reassurance or comfort. She was asking for his honest assessment of a complicated situation. I feel completed, Stuart said carefully. Not happy that someone died, but finished with a chapter of our lives that needed to end. Is Mom going to die in prison too? The question was asked with clinical curiosity rather than emotional distress, but it still cut deep. I don't know, sweetheart, but that's our responsibility to figure out. Our responsibility is to build the best life we can for ourselves. Emma nodded solemnly. Dad, do you think Mom will ever try to see me when she gets out? Stuart had been dreading this question for 2 years, knowing it would eventually come. She might, and if that happens, we'll deal with it together. But Emma, I want you to understand something very important. You get to decide what kind of relationship you want with your mother. No one else gets to make that choice for you. What if I don't want a relationship with her at all? Then that's your choice, and I'll support it completely. Emma returned to her cereal, apparently satisfied with his answer. But Stuart knew this conversation was far from over. It would be revisited many times as Emma grew older and developed a more sophisticated understanding of what her mother had done and why. Later that morning, Stuart received a call from his business partner, Dean Booker, asking him to lunch. Dean had been managing most of the day-to-day operations of their construction consulting firm, while Stuart focused on rebuilding his personal life, and the company had actually grown stronger during this period. Over lunch, Dean brought up a subject they'd been dancing around for months. Stuart, I've been thinking about expanding into some of the charity construction work that opened up after the Wiley scandal. A lot of organizations are looking for contractors they can absolutely trust, and your reputation for integrity is stronger than ever. Stuart considered this carefully. The idea of working with charitable organizations again, the same types of organizations that Sophia and Craig had defrauded, felt like closing a circle. But it also felt like an opportunity to demonstrate that not everyone in the construction industry was willing to exploit nonprofit organizations. What kind of projects are we talking about? Everything from homeless shelters to children's hospitals. The work that actually matters, Stuart. The kind of projects where cutting corners literally hurts people who can't protect themselves. Stuart thought about Emma's essay assignment, about being someone worthy of admiration, about the kind of legacy he wanted to build for his daughter. Set up some meetings. Let's see what good we can do. That evening, Stuart found Emma in her room working on her essay. She decided to write about her father after all, but she'd expanded the scope to include lessons about justice, consequences, and protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Dad, can you help me with this paragraph? I want to explain why it's important that bad people face consequences, but I don't want to sound mean. Stuart sat on the edge of her bed and read what she'd written. The essay was sophisticated for a 10-year-old, showing clear moral reasoning and a nuanced understanding of complex issues. Emma, this is excellent. But let me ask you something. What do you think the most important part of the story is? Emma considered this seriously. That you didn't let bad people get away with hurting good people. That's part of it. But I think the most important part is that through everything that happened, I never stopped protecting you. That's what parents are supposed to do. Protect their children from harm, even when that harm comes from people who are supposed to love them. Emma leaned against her father's shoulder, a rare display of physical affection from a child who is usually more reserved. Dad, do you think I'll be as strong as you when I grow up? Stuart hugged his daughter close, feeling the weight of her absolute trust and the responsibility that came with being her primary guide through the moral complexities of the world. Emma, you're already stronger than you know, and you have something I didn't have when I was your age. You have someone who will always tell you the truth, no matter how difficult it might be. That kind of foundation makes all the difference. As Stuart tucked Emma into bed that night, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. Sophia would serve at least 5 more years in federal prison, assuming good behavior. Craig was dead, his empire scattered to the winds. The charities they defrauded had been compensated through asset seizures and restitution orders. Justice, in all its cold and imperfect forms, had been served. But more importantly, Emma was thriving. She was growing into exactly the kind of person Stuart had hoped she would become. Strong, moral, analytical, and absolutely clear about the difference between right and wrong. She would never be naive about human nature, never vulnerable to the kind of manipulation that relied on trust and innocence. Stuart had built his revenge with the same precision he brought to every construction project. Careful planning, quality materials, and attention to detail that ensured the structure would last. But unlike buildings, which eventually outlive their usefulness and must be demolished, the lessons Emma had learned from watching her father respond to betrayal would last her entire lifetime. As he turned off the lights in Emma's room, Stuart allowed himself a moment of genuine satisfaction. He'd kept his promise to protect his daughter from the consequences of her mother's choices. He'd ensured that justice was served to those who had betrayed his trust. And he'd built a foundation for Emma's future that would never crack under pressure. Stuart Muller never forgot, never forgave, and never failed to finish what he started. But perhaps most importantly, he'd raised a daughter who understood that some principles were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The gift box that had started this entire journey sat in Stuart's office safe, the expensive watch still in its original packaging, not as evidence that was no longer needed, but as a reminder that even the most elaborate deceptions eventually revealed themselves to those patient enough to wait and observant enough to see. Stuart had waited. He had seen, and he had responded with a precision that would echo through the rest of his life and his daughter's life, and perhaps even beyond that. Some foundations, once properly built, truly do last forever. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.